Welcome. Today is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022, 2 days away from St. Patrick's Day. So I hope you're ready to have your green on. My name is Ward Keever. I am the President, CEO, and founder of Covenant Wealth Strategies. I'm joined today by Michelle Fisher. And today our Covenant Wealth Strategies team is delighted to present this latest installment of our Stone Barn Speaker Series. We're excited to introduce you to Mr. David Ingram. Dave is the Regional Vice President of Hartford Funds. Dave was born and raised in South Jersey, where, Dave, we did a little additional research and found out that you are actually on the South Jersey Basketball Hall of Fame. So I don't know if you knew that we knew that, but we know that. But Dave's been working with financial advisors and their clients for over 17 years. Dave's an undergraduate in business with a concentration in marketing and a master's degree with a concentration in business management. But if you ask David his proudest accomplishment, he would tell you that he and his wife Elizabeth have an 8-year-old son, Lincoln, and 5-year-old twins, Max and Jax. So there's a lot of young men going on in that household, which my wife Debbie and I have 2 boys who are now 29 almost and 26. So it's a great responsibility raising young men. David has written articles for the financial industry and has been featured on podcasts and delivered over 1,000 speaking presentations during his career. And his speeches on the markets have brought him to multiple countries and multiple continents. But locally, he's an Ocean City, New Jersey fan where he loves to run on the boardwalk. He and I have probably passed each other without realizing it. But David, I understand that despite all your time in Ocean City, New Jersey, you have not surfed. So we're going to try and fix that for you this summer. We'll get you down and get you out on the surfboard this summer. So today's topic is the quality of life. We're going to be examining 3 questions from the MIT AgeLab. David will share with you a little bit more about that, but MIT AgeLab is a wealth of resources and knowledge and wisdom that we're excited to be able to tap into a little bit of that today. But part of what we're going to be talking about is longevity planning. And this is an area for me personally that I find fascinating. I've studied it for years, and it's just amazing when we think about the implications. One of the best books that I've read on this topic is actually a collection of essays entitled The Upside of Aging. And as I mentioned, it's a collection of essays. There's a number of different very worthwhile takeaways from that book. But 2 of the things that just really struck me as I was reading through this, and I've read through it now multiple times, one of those things is a chart that shows life expectancy. And literally for thousands of years, the chart was flat, and we had a life expectancy of about 40. And in the last 100 years, it has literally doubled to over 80. And so there have been things that have taken place within the last 100 years, within the last 50 years, within the last 10 years that have dramatically changed, increased life expectancy. And if we were to project that going forward, what are the implications of that? People used to think that a certain age was old. And now that they find themselves that age, they no longer think that's old anymore. This is a common phenomenon, right? The second point that was made that I thought was fascinating was that, quote, the first person to live to age 150 has almost certainly already been born. And that's fascinating to think about. Right now, the fastest growing demographic in our nation is those age 100 and over. So that's a pretty long life. But age 150, how do you plan for that? So each of us is aging ourselves, and so these comments and these presentations that Dave's going to share with us is relevant for us ourselves. For those of us who are still blessed to have our parents living, This presentation may be very, very relevant for us as we think about our parents and aging parents and how to interact with and plan for and care for them as well. So I'm so excited that you have joined us today. I think that this presentation is going to be a very, very valuable and worthwhile use of your time. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to our featured guest speaker this afternoon, David Ingram. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Ward. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, hey, Ward and Michelle, thanks so much for putting this event together and inviting me to be a part of it, because I think it's timely and timeless. And the timeliness of it is I truly believe a lot of folks out there could probably benefit from a little social distancing with respect to the media and the markets. Like, we know there's a lot going on in the markets, and we also know the media is doing a lot to amplify the noise of what's going on in the markets. But we don't want to lose sight of long-term and longevity planning. And at the same time, whereas I thank and appreciate you, Ward and Michelle, I want to thank the folks out there that took the time out of their own schedule to join us here today. And, you know, it always brings me back to this thing I heard once. If you had a seminar on how to be a good parent, you know who would probably show up to that? Good parents. So again, it speaks volumes for those people that have joined us here today, taking the time to hear more about this idea of longevity planning. But at the same token, I think this is a topic that should be near and dear to your heart. We're going to focus on this theme of getting old. But really, more specifically, here's what we're going to focus on. By many accounts, people are living longer than ever before. And this truly is a worldwide phenomenon. So if we took a quick trip around the globe, did you know that the average person in China lives 30 years longer today than people of China 50 years ago? They've added 3 decades to their life expectancy within the last 50 years. If you move from China over to Japan, did you know, fact, the sale of adult diapers has actually surpassed that of baby diapers in Japan. That tells you all you need to know with this idea of people living longer than ever before. But if we bring it back to the good old US of A, within 15 short years, this great nation will have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And for babies being born today, researchers peg it at a 50% chance that babies being born today will live to celebrate their 100th birthday, causing many to feel and predict that 100 years of age is fast becoming the new normal in terms of life expectancy here in the US. So we're going to cover a lot of ground here today, and rest assured, any questions you may have, I'd ask you to simply direct them to Michelle at covenantwealthstrategies.com. She'll be able to compile these questions, and then we can certainly take some time at the end to have a bit of a Q&A. But when we talk about this notion of people living longer than ever before and all of the facts and figures I just laid out for you, this is why we at Hartford Funds, that we've founded and continue to partner with this entity known as the MIT AgeLab. And then our enthusiasm and excitement in turn is having the opportunity to partner with the likes of Covenant Wealth Strategies and bring this information and insight that the MIT AgeLab has curated around this idea of longevity planning to people like yourselves. So most folks are familiar to varying degrees of who is MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. These are some of the brightest minds, some of the smartest individuals in the world. And this AgeLab is essentially a think tank of PhDs, researchers, scientists, engineers. And collaboratively and collectively, they're focused on this idea of longevity planning. We know people are living longer than ever before, but what good is that additional length of life if it's not a life well lived? So the MIT AgeLab is having a tremendous impact across many different business lines. We know people are getting older, but how can we help them enjoy and experience a future quality of life? And before I tie it into the financial services marketplace, which is going to be the focus of today's call, let me give you an actual case study of how the MIT AgeLab is impacting businesses. So this case study is CVS. Most of us have shopped in a CVS, probably been in a CVS in the last month or the last week. Well, CVS looked at their consumer demographic, and they quickly saw that they had an aging demographic. So they wanted to make sure that their stores were aging gracefully and in alignment with their core consumer, the older American. There's only one problem. Many of CVS corporate executives were someone like myself, a 48-year-old, readily physical, able, healthy individual. So for me to move in and around a CVS store, not that big of a deal. But I'm not indicative, I'm not representative of the 80 or 90-year-old man or woman that is a core consumer of mine. So CVS enlisted the help of the MIT AgeLab, brought them out to their physical bricks and mortar location to help them better understand the layout of their stores, and was their layouts conducive to that core consumer, older American demographic. And what the MIT AgeLab did, in conjunction with some of the top doctors at Harvard Medical School, they created something known as the Agnes suit, which if you're following along and you see on the video there, you see a couple of folks here with this Agnes suit on, and this suit almost looks like someone, what you might wear if you were to parachute, jump out of an airplane. And Agnes stands for Age Gain Now Empathy System. So this Agnes suit, if any of us were to get inside this suit, we can calibrate and dial it up to see what life will literally look and feel like at 70, 80, 90 years of age. There are goggles that you can create diminished visibility. You can calibrate them as such, which obviously is a natural inherent challenge of the aging process. You can put on gloves that will minimize your grip strength, your ability to grab objects. Again, very similar to someone that's experienced arthritic challenges that come with the aging process. There is a weight in the back, in the lumbar area, that will have you a little bit more hunched over. I mean, you start thinking about what diabolical human being would create such a suit, let alone get inside this thing. But let's go back to our case study at CVS. If I'm a 48-year-old corporate executive, again, I can whip around that CVS store, no problem. But you put me into this Agnes suit and you dial it up to what life is going to look and feel like at 80, 85 years of age. Now that store takes on a completely different meaning to me. And that's exactly what CVS did. They brought out the folks at MIT AgeLab. They had some of the corporate execs slip into this Agnes suit, navigate the stores, and it brought a wealth of information of changes they should implement to cater to that older American demographic. So when this happened, prior to this, CVS used to have these notoriously long aisles that seemed to stretch on forever. Again, someone like me, whipping in and out of those aisles, not a big deal. But if you're 80, 90 something years old and you find yourself in the wrong 2 or 3 aisles looking for one particular object, it's not long before you say, you know what, I'm done. I'm going home. I'll try to find this thing on Amazon Prime and have it shipped to me. So instead of these long aisles, they basically cut it in half to create more of islands, making it so much easier for people to navigate in and out of these rows. The other thing is CVS used to have these notoriously high shelf levels, which again, I'm 48 years old, I'm 6'2". There's not many things I can't grab off the top shelf. But again, if I'm living well into my 80s, 90s, or beyond, it can be much more challenging to reach up and grab things off the top shelf. So CVS introduced more and more baskets to house common objects. It is so much easier to reach down in a basket and put something in your cart than it is to grab something off your shelf. And then finally, the next time you go into a CVS, take a look at the floor. You may notice that CVS introduced different color coding patterns throughout the store on their floors, making it easier for someone with impaired vision to, again, easier navigate the store. But that is just a prime example, a simple case study of how the MIT AgeLab is impacting businesses that cater to the older American demographic, let me bring it back to the financial services marketplace and the implications of what MIT AgeLab Insight has, working with financial advisors and their clients. And again, if you're following along on the screens, you'll see a puzzle here. And this is a heck of a place to start. So imagine if we were all meeting in person. And as we met in person, we decided we were going to assemble a jigsaw puzzle. And if I asked folks out there, what is the most important first step in putting together a jigsaw puzzle? A lot of people may instinctively think, certainly what I thought, it's to some level or another, the corners, the edges, the borders, right? And in reality, whereas all those make sense, none of those represent the most important first step, which is to look at the picture on the box. It's only after we have clarity to what that picture on the box looks like can we move forward in an orderly fashion and gather the corners, the edges, the borders, and fit them together properly. When you think about your financial future, the corners, the edges, the borders, they tend to represent the financial planning, the estate planning, and the tax planning, all of which are essential. But the picture on the box, that's the longevity planning. And MIT AgeLab tells us that there's many Americans out there that lack clarity. They lack vision on what that picture on the box looks like, that future quality of life could and should look like. So MIT AgeLab has essentially distilled it down to 3 simple, yet highly thought-provoking questions that people can ask themselves, ask their spouses, engage their adult children with these questions to help them find the answers to articulate the future quality of life, to better crystallize the picture on the box. And I promise you, before we move forward, you will not be blown away by the complexity of these questions. But rest assured, if it's the brain trust at MIT that divides these questions, there's a much deeper meaning. So without further ado, 3 questions to help predict the future quality of life. Who's going to change my light bulbs? How will I get an ice cream cone? And with whom will I have lunch with? As I mentioned, you're probably not overwhelmed by the complexity of these questions, but let's take a deeper dive into each of these individually to get a better understanding of what we're talking about here. So when we say who's going to change my light bulbs, certainly it is understood. We don't want to see our 87-year-old grandmother or 93-year-old grandfather balancing on a stool trying to swap a light bulb out of the kitchen ceiling. But here's really what we mean by who's going to change your light bulbs. AARP did a survey. They asked various people, various ages, various walks of life, where do you plan on living when you reach the age of 65? Now, as you can imagine, the #1 response by a wide margin, right here at home, right? Like when I turn 65, what is really going to change? Home is where the heart is. Home is where the memories are. Maybe home is where the mortgage is. What is really going to change? Well, what you really need to think about, and many people may not, what are the ongoing renovations, modifications, upkeep, and maintenance that will be necessary to allow one to age gracefully within their home? We know the aging process in of itself can turn that castle into a hassle. And this comes as a bit of surprise to many people. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the #1 out-of-pocket expenditure for people 65 and older is actually housing. And we know that's with or without a mortgage because the property taxes are never going away, but nor is the necessity for those ongoing renovations, modifications, upkeep, and maintenance. It should come as no small surprise, the fastest growing demographic in the residential remodeling industry is the older American demographic. And you think about these modifications, these improvements, these renovations, these things that you will need to allow you to age in place gracefully. There's a tremendous, excuse me one second, there's a tremendous website called aginginplace.com. And at aginginplace.com, they actually highlighted an article that focused on the top 10 design trends within the older American community. And I'm not going to go through all 10 verbatim, but let me just give you some examples of the common design trends, modifications we're seeing in the older American home. So number one is leveling of entryways, right? A lot of us out there may have or know someone that has the seemingly innocent, seemingly innocuous 1 or 2 steps up from the living room or dead into the kitchen area. No big deal for a lot of people. But if you're living well into your 80s, 90s, or beyond, those 1 or 2 steps up present a new hazard every day you move from room to room. So we see leveling of entryways throughout the home. Another common change we're seeing in the older American home, downsizing, living on 1 floor, right? That 3 or 4 story home may have made all the sense in the world when we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s. But now again, we're living our 80s, 90s, and beyond. Those 3, 4 story home, we've outlived the purpose, the sensibility of that. So we actually see this proliferation of people downsizing from that 3 or 4 story home to that 2 or 3 bedroom condo. And then again, another common modification we're seeing within older American homes, things designed for better accessibility. Lowering cabinets in the kitchen, making it easier to access appliances. Another common one we see is swapping out the tub for the shower that offers the sit-down stall. But ladies and gentlemen, if I went through all of these top design trends, all of these trends are designed to prevent one thing from occurring within that older American's home. And if we were together and I asked, what is that one thing? I think people would say almost in unison, the fall, right? Because nobody's death certificate reads he or she fell. It's the fall that could lead to diminished physical ability, that could then lead to poor mobility, isolation, depression, all of which simply exacerbate the symptoms associated with death. So unfortunately, far too many of us know someone that much later in life, they took a nasty fall, and the fall didn't kill them, but the fall killed them. It expedited their ultimate demise. And why is that? Because the fall drastically altered the picture on the box, their future quality of life. So that question, who's going to change your light bulbs? What we're saying is, how are you going to maintain your home if you intend to live in place within that home? We're seeing more and more Americans live in their primary residence for longer periods of time because living in one's home is a symbol of independence. So how are you going to maintain that home? But that also segues perfectly into the second question, how will I get an ice cream cone? And by this, we don't mean just heading out on what hopefully is an unseasonably warm March day like today and grab an ice cream cone at your local store. What we mean is, how are you going to maintain your access and independence, right? Like if living in one's home is a symbol of independence, I would argue the car keys are the ultimate symbol of independence in our society. And it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 88, one's ability to drive is a symbol of independence. And yet what's going to happen when we talk about maintaining access and independence later in life? What's going to happen if you have diminished physical mobility or diminished, even lost ability in terms of driving, right? I mean, most of us as adults, we tend to go through these 3 distinct phases of adulthood. There's the go-go years, there's the slow-go years, and then unfortunately, a lot of us are going to live to see the no-go years. And so how are we going to be experiencing, how are we going to be accessing life during those proverbial no-go years? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be all about access, right? And so MIT AgeLab tells us, when we think about where are these communities popping up at, catering to this older American demographic, the number one location we're seeing an increase in older American communities, it's on and around college and university campuses. So you think about, why is that? What is the attraction? What is the lure of these campuses and universities that bring these older American communities? Well, again, to a degree, it may be the art, it may be the culture, it may be the sports. Good luck to all those UD fans against Villanova this Friday. To a degree, it might be the readily available medical facilities, teaching hospitals. But the number one reason given, it's the walkable access. You know, if you've been on or around a college or university campus, you know you can pretty much walk anywhere to get anything you want. Take it a step further, there's probably a fair amount of folks out there that are familiar, maybe even have visited, might even own a place at the Villages in Florida. And so for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Villages in Florida, it is a self-sustaining community catering exclusively to the older American demographic. It's the fastest growing community in the United States of America. It's already larger than Manhattan. And when I talk about the no-go years, diminished or lost ability in terms of driving, need not worry for the proud citizens of the Villages, because there's already over 50,000 golf carts registered to the people of the Villages. I am being somewhat facetious when I say, if you remember the old explorer Ponce de Leon, who was in search of the Fountain of Youth, well, we know he was looking in Florida. I personally think he was just a few centuries early, because for those of you that are familiar with the Villages, maybe even have visited the Villages, it is like a modern day Fountain of Youth, because everything is catered to that older American, and it is all about access. So this will actually bring us to our third and final question. And let me just do a quick recap. That first question, who's going to change your light bulbs? How are you going to maintain your home if you intend to age within your home? Second question, how are you getting an ice cream cone? How are you going to maintain access and independence, particularly later in life? And then finally, this question, with whom will I have lunch with? Here, what we're delving into is, how are you going to maintain a strong social network throughout your retirement years? And let's think about it this way. Earlier, I was saying, when someone takes a nasty fall within their home, it can drastically alter the picture on the box. It can have a negative impact on their future quality of life. There's something else that can dramatically impact the picture on the box, that future quality of life. It happens to almost all of us, many of which we're not even aware of. And it's the sheer act of retirement in of itself. So let's unpack this for a second. What do we mean by that? Well, for those of us that are working, when we wake up, we answer that alarm, we go to work. Just by working, we are satisfying three key facets of life. We are instantaneously and automatically being physically, mentally, and socially engaged on a daily basis just by going to work. Then we retire. And what are we doing to proactively replace that physical, mental, and social engagement that's instantly eliminated the day you retire? Right? And I think, and Ward, maybe I can have you chime in here in a moment if you're available, because I'm sure you can attest to this. Over the years you've done this, the robust client base you have, but I've talked with people like Ward over the years, and there are clients that leading up to retirement, there's these feelings of excitement and enthusiasm and exuberance. And then they retire. And you know, Ward, I don't know if it's years, months, or weeks later, sometimes those feelings are replaced with some boredom, emptiness, and loneliness. I don't know if it's so much they miss their job or miss their boss, as much as constantly or subconsciously they miss that physical, mental, and social engagement that work provided them. So you might have a much better explanation than I might on this, dealing with all the clients you've had over the years.
Sure. Well, I mean, we all know people who, you know, they retire and they paint the garage and then they're out of things to do. So when we're working with our clients, Dave, we talk to them about it's everybody knows what they're going to be retiring from. Critically important to know what you'll be retiring to. That is to say, to have a vision, to have an understanding of what sorts of things you'll be engaged with in retirement. Are there hobbies, maybe golf or painting? Are there volunteer opportunities? In terms of maybe a group of other retirees or people from your church or faith community, or the opportunity possibly to do some child care for maybe grandchildren or great-grandchildren. So there's a lot of different things, but it's critically important to have a good picture, a good understanding, an idea of what you'll be retiring to, not just what you'll be retiring from. Otherwise, you wind up in a situation where, quite frankly, for a lot of people, there's a loss of a sense of purpose. When I was working every day, I knew why I was getting out of bed. I had purpose to get out of bed. And so sometimes if I'm not sure why I'm getting out of bed, that could lead to, as you mentioned, maybe depression, just due to lack of purpose. So yeah, I think these things are very important in terms of who's my tribe once I retire. Michelle and I were speaking yesterday to a dear friend of ours who is retiring. And, he's an extreme extrovert, and his wife is very much an introvert, because opposites attract, right? And she has expressed to him, I'm not your friend, I'm not your coworkers. I cannot fill that need. If they could give you your office back and just not give you a paycheck and not have any job duties, that would be perfect for him, because that way he could be socialized and with everything else. So it's important to know who's my tribe. To your question, who will I have lunch with?
I'm going to steal your words too, and I'll be using that again. It's this idea of, we know what you're retiring from, but we need to make sure you know what you're retiring to. And going back to this idea, with whom will I have lunch with? Again, how are you going to create that tribe? How are you going to have that strong social network, these activities planned on the calendar that will give you that physical, mental, and social engagement that is so vital to us as human beings? We don't want to see someone that lives so long, they've simply outlived their close social network. Because that same someone, that in of itself may drastically alter that picture on the box, the future quality of life, that future zest and zeal to live and move forward. And so bringing this all together, again, the importance of maintaining a strong social network, making sure it's staggered with people of different ages so that we can have that social network. And it's a vital part of our life for as long as our lives may be. And as we come down the home stretch here, I spend very little time talking about the financial planning side of things. And that was by design. Like, listen, people are living longer than ever before. That does not make Ward and Covenant Wealth Strategies' role any easier, right? They have to figure out, how are we going to pay? How are we going to fund this longevity of life? But the reason I spend very little time talking about that, Ward and his team has been solving this riddle. They've been cracking this code for years. So you don't need me to talk to or tell you about that. They have you covered. But equally important to the financial planning, the estate planning, and the tax planning is that longevity planning. Because if there was one common theme throughout this entire presentation, if there's one common theme throughout entire life, it is this: so often the greatest risks facing us are those things that we don't even see coming. It's the challenges we're unaware of that pose the biggest threat to us. So the purpose of today was to bring some of these challenges front and center. By many accounts, people are living longer than ever before. But how can you proactively plan, prepare, get out in front of this? And just by asking yourself those three questions: who's going to change my light bulbs? How will I get an ice cream cone? And with whom will I have lunch with? Just asking yourself those questions will bring you inherently closer to solving and mitigating the challenges that are inherent with the aging process. So we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. Here are some simple next steps. For everyone out there, rest assured, Michelle will be following up. There's a convenient quality of life worksheet that has been created and curated by the MIT AgeLab. You will be receiving a copy of this just to, again, engage some dialogue. For you personally, maybe working with your spouse, your partner, involving your adult children, this simple worksheet will take you in the right direction. And again, any questions we may have compiled, we'll address those in a moment, but I would be remiss if I didn't end with this. We covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. So if you took nothing else away from this presentation, by all accounts, we will be sharing this great earth for a very long time together. So I really hope and wish that the rest of your year be the best of your years. So again, Ward, Michelle, thank you so much for putting this together, inviting me to be a part of it. Thank you for all the folks out there that invested their own personal time to hear what we had to share. And I hope they found that to be a valuable investment of your time. So Ward and Michelle, I will throw it back to you.
Sure. So Michelle at Covenant Wealth Strategies is the email to forward questions to. We've had a few questions come in already, but before we get to those questions, Dave, I wanted to make maybe a statement and then a question. So in the work that we do with our clients, you mentioned a little bit about financial planning and financial aspects of aging. I guess I would just share that we see one of the greatest risks to our clients is actually what we would refer to as longevity risk. And that's the risk of maybe living longer than you expected, or more specifically financially, outliving your assets. And so that's one of the reasons why we place so much emphasis on cash flow planning and cash flow modeling in retirement. And that would include things like Social Security maximization strategies and the idea of delaying at least the larger of the two Social Security benefits in a spousal situation until age 70, or as long as possible until age 70, in order to maximize that larger of the two Social Security benefits, which is payable for the life not only of that individual, but the surviving spouse. We talk about the importance of making pension decisions. And the default, you know, for those who work in a place where they have a pension, which is few and far between today, but commonly is to take what's called the joint and 50% to survivor, because by law, if you are married, you must take a reduced pension with a 50% to survivor. Before that law was passed, you didn't have to leave anything for a survivor, and we've seen people, we've encountered people who literally passed away and their surviving spouse got a zero survivor benefit from the pension. But as today, you have the law that says that, you know, a joint and 50% to survivor. And so again, we're typically here working with the survivor. Sometimes they come to us once they are the survivor. Sometimes we're in a situation with a husband and wife, and we've been honored to walk through life together and be with that survivor. But you know, you're already losing the smaller of the two Social Security benefits, and now we're losing half of the pension income. You know? And so it's important to do Social Security planning strategies. It's important to do pension election options within the context of a comprehensive financial plan, and thinking about what are the implications of the first death of a couple. And then the use of guaranteed pension style income products, including annuities, which I know you're with Hartford Funds, but I know that's related to Hartford Insurance Company, with the idea of using annuities to provide a guaranteed income stream that is payable for life or payable for the life of you and your spouse. Even if the account value goes to zero, the income continues, and these are tools and techniques that we use to try to mitigate this longevity risk, or specifically to try to mitigate the risk of quote unquote outliving your money. So I would just kind of put that out there within the context of this presentation. Now, bringing it back to your presentation, David, maybe a question for you as I was going through these slides and having our conversation together. Generally speaking, do you feel that, or in your studies or with the MIT AgeLab, however you want to, whatever you want to reference to answer this question, generally more prudent to quote unquote age in place, or to consider a CCRC, continuing care retirement community? I know there are different models there. So, you know, we're talking about how do I change my life, or who changes my light bulbs? Obviously, if I'm living independently, it's either me or somebody I pay to come in. Whereas if I live in a retirement community, whether it's the villages or something else, typically those services are provided. So obviously you didn't directly address that dichotomy in the presentation, but do you have some thoughts on that topic that you can share with us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the easy answer is it's going to be up to the individual. There are going to be some people by design want to automate, delegate, eliminate all of these things, these responsibilities from their life. And so aging in place may not be the best option for them. That's by design. There's going to be some people by default may not have the luxury of making this decision. They will need to rely on someone or something to assist with all of these questions we shared. But then obviously there's going to be no shortage of people out there that are, hey, I want the responsibility. I want that feeling of independence. I want to remain here at home. So it's a very valid and strong question, but I think the easy answer is it's going to be person specific on how best answer it.
Certainly there are costs associated with moving into a retirement community or a CCRC. Typically there's a large upfront entrance cost that might be several $100,000. And then there's ongoing monthly costs that might actually increase if you need additional care like assisted living or full skilled nursing or that sort of thing. So there certainly are significant costs associated with that, which maybe initially, at least, you don't have when you're quote unquote aging in place, living in your home. But when the point in time comes that you need assistance with those things, you will need to hire somebody to come in, whether part-time, full-time, whether it's for general housekeeping or maintenance related issues or skilled nursing. So there are considerations, including financial. You shared a website. I think it was aginginplace.com. I have to say I'm not familiar with that, but shortly after our presentation, I will become familiar with it. Anything there, David, that you want to highlight from that resource, or any other tools or resources for those who are specifically interested more in the aging in place route?
Yeah, so aginginplace.com, I strongly suggest that people go to that website, check out the article I referenced called the Top 10 Design Trends Within the Older American Home. Another resource I didn't cover within the slides here, but I was talking about the ongoing renovations, modifications for someone wanting to age in place. Another website people could and should check out is NAHB.org, which stands for National Association of Home Builders.org. So let's say you or maybe your aging parents want to age in place and they're thinking about what are those modifications, upkeep, things I should be focusing on. Well, this National Association of Home Builders.org, there is a directory called the CAPS directory. It's easy to find on the website, and CAPS stands for Certified Aging in Place Specialists. So you could type in your zip code and you could search within a 25-mile radius, who are those product providers, those business professionals that have sought out additional education to get this special designation known as being CAPS certified, Certified Aging in Place Specialists. These are designers, remodelers. These are realtors that have a niche focus on helping people downsize from that 3-story home to that 2-bedroom condo. So again, these are the service providers that can cater to that person that's looking to age in place, age gracefully within their home.
And then are there any particular resources, David, for people who are thinking about possibly moving to a retirement community? How do you evaluate different retirement communities? What are the considerations? What tools and resources might you have available for folks in that category?
Two-part answer to that. Number one, anyone, this is kind of overstating the obvious, but never underestimate the power of Google, right? You can just Google something like that, and I promise you, some third-party, non-biased entity has recently written an article on that exact topic. Something else, this is a wealth of information I strongly encourage people to refer to frequently. This entire presentation, all of this insight was brought to you by the MIT AgeLab. I tell everyone out there, really implore you to go to agelab.mit.edu. So if you go to AgeLab, AGELAB.mit.edu, there is just an arsenal of information and articles built around this concept of longevity planning. I think someone could spend days just digestifying this information and how it's pertinent to where they are in their lives.
Great, thank you, Dave. One question that came in was, what age is it appropriate to consider begin planning for this sort of thing? So is there a particular age or time frame that people should begin to give thought to these things?
So that question taps into why I'm so passionate about this topic, because this topic on the macro, it's age agnostic. And what I mean by this and where my passion lies is this topic, I look at this topic through the lens of my 80-year-old father and 79-year-old mother. You know, they've been happily married for over 50 years. These are the questions they're faced with on a daily basis. And if mom and dad aren't dealing and answering for these questions today, a lot of times it falls onto the shoulders of myself or my two older sisters to solve for these questions. And far too often, the adult children are dealing with these questions after something bad already happened. You know, mom or dad took a nasty spill within the home, and the adult children are left trying to figure things out. You know, or mom or dad, one predeceased the other, and the adult kids are trying to make sure that the surviving parent is good, their social network is sound. The problem with that, Ward, and again, you can probably attest to this with some of the adult children of your older clients, in today's society, so often the adult kids don't live in the same city, let alone the same state. That just adds even more of a magnifying glass to some of these challenges. So, you know, I look at this presentation through the lens of my parents that should and are dealing with these questions. But at the same token, I think about people like myself, 48 years old, people like me that have aging parents. This presentation is equally relevant to them so they can help mom and dad get out in front of this. And I'll add one more thing, Ward. I would even say it is of greater importance for women to think about this. And all I simply mean by this, if you factor in this one statistic, in our country, women 65 and older, over 40% live alone. Some of that's by choice, maybe it's by divorce, and obviously we know women are 4 times more likely to become widows than men are widowers. But so you take about all these challenges that we laid out here, and then you imagine the person that's left to go about it alone. And so again, I just can't encourage people out there to really take heart, to really think about this and share it with others. You know, this is important information that it's essential for people to think about, plan, and prepare for. And I'd argue even more so if you're a woman.
I think that's a very good insight, so thank you for sharing. Where would you recommend people start? We've referenced some websites and some different tools, but is there just a good starting place, Dave, in terms of, and you and I are having this conversation per se as peers, and you and I are talking about, you know, your 80-year-old dad and 79-year-old mom and my aging parents and that sort of thing. But maybe people are coming at it also because they are the, per se, 80-year-old dad and 79-year-old mom. So from either perspective, where's a good place to start, and maybe resources or tools? How do you have this conversation with your parents? How do you have this conversation with your kids? Is there kind of a little book that we can walk through?
Yeah, so let me download all that. Anytime you want someone to engage in a behavior or take action, the more steps there are for someone to engage in said behavior, the less likely they are to do it. So you want to minimize steps. Complexity is the enemy of execution. So keep it simple. Number one, Michelle's going to be emailing you this worksheet. Print it out. Share it with your spouse. Reach out to your adult children. You know, talk to your friend, your neighbor, your colleague. Hey, I came across this presentation. 2 heads are better than one. Like, let's go through it. I'd also stress having this conversation with your spouse, especially those that are approaching retirement. You may not necessarily be on the same page, You may think you are, but until we take it from think to ink, from vapor to paper, and put out our answers, we may realize, wow, I didn't know that's what retirement looked like or meant to you. So keep it simple. Print the sheet out, start there. If you want to make it even more simple, connect with the folks at Covenant Wealth Strategies. Like, you don't have to go about this alone. You don't need all the answers. It does help to know someone that has those answers for you, though. And without getting on my soapbox, but too late for that, what does it take to be successful? It takes two things. Number one, you have to have a plan. So whether we're talking about financial planning, estate planning, tax planning, or longevity planning, you have to have a plan. And if you work with folks at Covenant Wealth Strategies, it's not a one size fits all. Every person out there has a different time horizon, investment objective, risk tolerance. So you have to have a plan that is designed specifically to meet your individual unique wants and needs. And then secondly, you have to stick to the plan, right? Like it's that simple. You have to have a plan and you have to stick to the plan. And again, when you can lean on seasoned, experienced financial professionals to help you guide and navigate through this journey of life, then it makes it that much easier to stick to the plan, which those are the two things I think keep it simple and put yourself in the best position possible to be successful, whether we're talking about financial planning or longevity planning.
Great. On that topic of consult with your spouse, I do this for a living, but we had a little aha moment about 9 months ago. So my wife Debbie and I were in the car, and it was during the summertime, and it was during a season where our leadership team here at Covenant Wealth Strategies was talking about succession planning and resilience planning and continuity planning and different exercises that we go through on a regular basis to make sure that our firm is positioned to continue to provide care for our clients. And so Debbie and I were talking about these things in the car on a 2-hour drive down to Ocean City. And she asked me, she said, so when are you thinking about retiring? Which was just kind of funny because she and I had not had this conversation previously. And I said, well, I'm getting ready to turn 55, and so 60 feels way too soon because that's only 5 years from now. And so maybe 65, probably 70, possibly 75. And I was speaking honestly and transparently, but I was also speaking selfishly with only thinking of myself and not considering her perspective or asking her question or thoughts about what her expectations were. And it was a fascinating conversation. Her response I will never forget. She looked at me and she said, if we were on 55 heading south, I can tell you exactly where we were, right? And she said, if you're telling me right now that you think you're not retiring until you're 75 years old, I'm telling you right now that you're going to be very lonely. So apparently it's going to be before then. And so I need to also figure out what I'll be retiring to, right? We talked about that, what you're retiring to. Well,
Ward, on that note, there's a funny joke that I heard running around the hallowed halls of the MIT AgeLab. And when one spouse retires before the other, if they're not on the same page, what they have to be careful of is, hey, that spouse that's still there that hasn't retired, you're now getting twice as much spouse with half the income. So that's just something to think about. So for some people that's a great deal. For other people, that's no deal.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of ice cream, there was a question that came in about when is our annual Covenant Wealth Strategies ice cream social going to be. So despite COVID last year, we were able to have our annual ice cream social. So I'm very pleased to let you know that we've already had conversations about this, and it will be in June. Specific date to be determined. We are discussing the location, but likely will be here at the office so that we can have some privacy and exclusivity to our event. And we'll be bringing the Woodside Creamery truck here to the office. So if any of you have thoughts or questions about that or opinions that you'd like to input, please feel free to give us a call. But where will you be able to get your ice cream? Not the question of how will I get my ice cream, but you'll drive to our office and bring your family and friends, and how will you get your ice cream? Come to our office, and when, we'll give you a date, but it's going to be in June. So with that, we are coming to the top of the hour. David, I just want to say thank you very much for your time, for bringing your expertise and these materials from the MIT AgeLab, those suits that you can wear that simulate aging. That was interesting. I hadn't really considered that previously. I'm not sure that I'm convinced I want to run out and get one, but just knowing that they exist, you know, expands my horizons, expands my thought process. So we thank you, David Ingram. Thanks to each of you who are on the call this afternoon. We hope that this has been an excellent investment of your time. If you have questions, please feel free to give us a call. We welcome the opportunity to walk through life together, to do life together, important transitions such as retirement and aging. And remember, we want to be one of your first 5 phone calls when something happens, whether it's really great or something really hard. We want to be one of your first 5 phone calls because we care and because there's always a financial implication to whatever it is that just happened. And the sooner you bring us in, the more choices, the more options, the more flexibility that we have. So please keep us top of mind. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great St. Patty's Day on Thursday. God bless each of you.